Have you ever placed your faith in someone implicitly, only to feel the world shift beneath your feet when that trust was shattered? Betrayal, whether grand or small, is an experience so universal, so sharply edged, that it haunts the memory and shapes destinies. But what if the consequences go beyond individual heartbreak? What if one act of betrayal, compounded by many, could topple a civilization famed for its splendor, ingenuity, and power? History is littered with stories of empires undone, not just by the strength of their enemies, but by the cracks that spread from within. Few stories are as chilling or as swift as that of the Inca civilization, whose downfall happened not over decades, but in a matter of mere weeks. The collapse was not a simple clash of swords and stone, but a twisting web of deceit, ambition, and the capacity for treachery that dwells in every human heart. At its zenith, the Inca Empire was a marvel of organization and unity, a vast network of cities, roads, and terraces that snaked for thousands of miles along the spine of the Andes. Ruling over nearly 12 million people, the Inca boasted a state apparatus that inspired awe and fear. Gold flowed like water, filling temples and tombs. Armies marched with mathematical coordination. Messengers sprinted across mountaintops with messages that held society together. Yet all this grandeur masked a fragile corazon that, when tested, cracked spectacularly. To understand how such a powerhouse could fall so quickly, we must journey back to the empire's high point, when faith in rulers and systems ran deep, but so too did simmering tensions, secret resentments, and the shadow of destiny waiting to pounce. To outsiders in the early 16th century, the Inca Empire seemed invulnerable. No rival army could stand against its disciplined ranks. No neighboring kingdom matched its engineering or administrative genius. From the bustling city of Cusco, the emperor's will radiated outward along an immense tapestry of stone-paved highways, reaching fertile valleys, soaring mountains, and distant rainforest fringes. The system's efficiency was legendary. Every subject contributed to communal work and received protection in return. Justice was swift, and social order meticulously maintained. But beneath this remarkable facade, the cracks were multiplying, subtle at first, soon gaping wide. The immense scale of the Incan realm, stretching over 500 miles, brought riches, but also complexity and strain. Dozens of ethnic groups, each with their own identities, languages, and ancient loyalties, had been woven together, not always willingly, under the rule of Cusco. The legacy of conquest and forced integration lingered as muted opposition among the subjugated, their faithfulness to the Sapa Inca a mix of awe, resentment, and necessity. Expansion, relentless and ambitious, created both wealth and fragility. Each new territory meant more tribute, but also new challenges: how to assimilate lands rapidly, how to keep distant governors loyal, how to prevent the simmering bitterness that comes from the memory of defeated ancestors. For every road and aqueduct built, there was a story of a town subdued, a local lord coerced, a freedom lost. Then, without warning, calamity arrived on the wind. It came invisible and unstoppable: diseases Europeans carried silently across oceans: smallpox, measles, influenza. The Inca, with no immunity or experience of these afflictions, suffered unimaginable losses. Fields fell fallow, whole villages vanished overnight. The social fabric quivered. Trust in the Sun King, once absolute, began to buckle as prayers went unanswered and ancient rituals gave no protection. Most devastatingly, smallpox felled the emperor himself. Huayna Cápac, who had presided over the empire's golden age, succumbed together with his designated heir, leaving behind 2 surviving sons who would become bitter rivals. In the chaos, the mechanisms that had held the empire together, family loyalty, divine right, bureaucratic discipline, started to unravel. It was in this volatile space, between tragedy and pride, that the seeds of betrayal were taking root. The Inca's system, so proud of its balance, had overstretched itself. In times of peace, unity could be maintained, but each new strain a deadly epidemic, a subtle grievance, a divide among the nobles pulled at the seams. The grand highways that once brought news and order now flowed with rumors, gossip, and discontent. The social order was shuddering, and few could sense that the moment of reckoning like no other, was approaching fast. The death of Huayna Cápac shattered the fragile calm of the Inca realm. In the vacuum left behind, the empire's mighty edifice quaked with uncertainty. There were 2 claimants to the throne: Huáscar, the legitimate son residing in the capital Cusco, and Atahualpa, his ambitious half-brother ruling the northern city of Quito. Each believed he held the right, perhaps even the obligation, to wear the golden fringe and command the four quarters of the Inca world. What followed was not an honorable contest for succession, but a fratricidal conflict that overthrew centuries of unity. Nobles and generals, villagers and chieftains across the Andes found themselves forced to choose sides in a war that was as much about personal enmity as about principle. For years, the valleys and high passes became battlefields, soaking up the lifeblood and weakening the sinews of the nation. The court of Cusco, once a monument to order and pageantry, turned paranoid and divided. Allegiances shifted as fortunes changed. A general promising loyalty to Huáscar by day might be plotting a secret accord with Atahualpa by night, weighing his survival against his honor. Each brother suspected the other's intentions, surrounding themselves with spies and loyalists, rewarding information and punishing rumor. Ambition and fear overtook tradition. Entire noble families were exiled or executed on scant evidence of collusion. The populace, exhausted by civil war and still reeling from plague, watched as ancient certainties fell away. Some local rulers seized the chaos to reassert their independence, refusing tribute, flirting with autonomy they had not tasted for a generation. Others, nursing grievances from past conquests, saw a chance to avenge ancestors by defecting, betraying their current overlords for promises of favor from either claimant. By the time Atahualpa's armies triumphed over those of Huáscar, marching into Cusco in victory, neither side resembled its former self. The coffers were depleted, the fields littered with the fallen, and the faith that once held all pieces together was threadbare. Suspicion, not solidarity, ruled the day. The machinery of empire messengers, administrators, local lords existed, but moved with heavy rust, slowed by fear and distrust. In that ragged interval, with Huáscar, a captive, and Atahualpa encamped in the north, word spread of a new kind of stranger near the western coast. Few understood that the true peril was now arriving, and that the toll of betrayal was only beginning. By the time Francisco Pizarro and his tiny Spanish force stumbled onto the fractured Inca realm in 1532, the empire was a giant weakened by its own suffering. Numbering fewer than 200 men, the Spaniards at first seemed like no more than a rumor-pale strangers on four-legged beasts unknown to the Andes, clad in shining metal and wielding thunderous weapons. What could a handful of foreigners threaten against the might of a world-spanning civilization? But in a society fractured by civil war, every enemy seemed less obvious, and every promise of an alliance more seductive. Pizarro, a man little noticed by history until this precise moment, peered into the chaos and saw opportunity. He understood that the Inca's formidable body contained a divided heart. Where trust was broken, betrayal could be bought. Pizarro played a careful game of apparent diplomacy. He sent envoys to Atahualpa, now the prima facie Sapa Inca, projecting friendship and curiosity, offering gifts, and requesting parley. At first, Atahualpa saw these strangers as few in number and unthreatening a curiosity, perhaps a novelty to be tested or absorbed. His counselors debated the risks. Some argued for caution, others for swift and violent rejection. Undergirding these deliberations, however, was the perpetual, invisible churn of politics. Many of the Inca's regional lords saw Spanish arrival as a chance to shift allegiances or settle old scores, offering intelligence and men to the newcomers, hoping to secure their own advancement in the likely event of further upheaval. The ill-fated meeting at Cajamarca was staged as a peaceful encounter but disguised a sinister motive. As Atahualpa arrived, surrounded by his senior retainers, an ambush was unleashed. Spanish guns, horses, and steel shattered the Inca's elite, and the emperor was seized first as a prize, then as a bargaining chip. In exchange for his life, Atahualpa offered a fortune in gold and silver, filling rooms with treasure, an act that would become legend. Yet in this moment of desperation, new betrayals began to multiply. Local tribes, fearful of Inca retaliation or hopeful for Spanish reward, provided translators, supplies, even soldiers. Among the Inca, leaders debated breaking with Atahualpa, some fearing he had lost the god's favor, others coerced by promises or threats from the invaders. The Spanish methodically undermined these trust bonds, extracting secrets and sowing doubt. Each transaction, each negotiation was haunted by the threat of duplicity. who would defect next, and who would be left behind. History often asks, how could such a small force conquer such a vast realm? The answer lies not only in musket and horse, but in the corrosive power of betrayal. The Spanish did not act alone. They walked paths cleared by discontent, guided by those who hoped that, by helping topple one master, they could prevent the rise of another. Once Atahualpa was in Spanish hands, negotiations quickly took on the character of a grim theatrete party pretending at good faith, yet both grasping for advantage. The emperor, believing the Spanish to be men swayed by wealth, orchestrated the greatest ransom in human history. Tons of gold and silver were gathered from the far ends of Tawantinsuyu, stripped from temples and tombs, ferried through mountain passes by bearers who whispered in awe and dread at the changing times. For weeks, the rooms of Cajamarca filled with treasure, blinding even the Spaniards with its sheer abundance. Yet transactions built on fear, not trust, corrode all bonds. Even as Atahualpa's followers rendered up the fruits of 100 generations, rumors pulsed through the Inca ransom charging him with weakness, even sacrilege, for submitting to foreign captors and negotiating with invaders. Regional chieftains, gauging which way power was shifting, hedged their loyalty. The system of chasqui, the legendary network of relay runners, began to falter. Messages no longer arrived with their former punctuality, as doubts, bribes, and threats silenced some and corrupted others. The Spanish, meanwhile, weighed betrayal as a tool. Even after the ransom's fulfillment, anxiety gnawed at them, wary of an uprising, and fearing Atahualpa's charisma might summon loyalty anew, they executed him under a pretext. The act was not only a breaking of oath, but also a symbolic murder of sacred sovereignty. The shock resonated throughout the Andes. If gold could not buy the emperor's life, then what force would protect any subject? After Atahualpa's death, reverberations of betrayal echoed through all segments of Inca society. With their revered leader gone, nobles and generals found themselves adrift, some surrendering, others attempting abortive resistance, many simply switching sides outright. Local lords who had once furnished tribute to Cusco now parlayed with the Spanish, offering their own lands and labor in return for preserved status. There were brutal reprisals and sudden handshakes, ambushes and abrupt fealties, as every level of hierarchy scrambled to avoid annihilation or secure opportunity. An empire built on networks, once knitted by trust and mutual obligation, went slack and frayed. The Spanish capitalized, setting indigenous allies against each other, promising autonomy or rewards, only to renege later. The system that had so recently synchronized mountains and valleys now spun into chaos, runners dispersed, crops untended, temples looted or left to rot. It was not just foreign swords, but the silent hand of collusion, the internal enemy that delivered the Andes to the conquerors. In a matter of months, the Inca world was remade. What had endured for centuries collapsed not in grand battles, but in 1,000 little betrayals, each a strand snapped in the web that once held the empire together. As the Spanish banner rose over Cusco and native ceremonies gave way to foreign prayers, the costs of betrayal settled in like a bitter frost. The swift collapse stunned even seasoned observers. Chroniclers both European and indigenous struggled to grasp the scope of what had transpired. Some tried to explain it as the will of fate or the wrath of strange gods, but beneath these narratives, a harsher truth lurked. The empire's undoing lay not just in muskets and horses, but in the erosion of trust that followed each act of treachery. The Spanish, victors for now, soon discovered that the power they clutched was as fragile as the gold they lusted after. Far from securing a peaceful new realm, they found themselves beset on all sides by rebellions, betrayals, and plots often orchestrated by those very chieftains and nobles who had aided them against the Inca monarchs. In their haste to divide and conquer, they had taught profound lessons in opportunism and deceit. Allies of one month turned to adversaries the next, and the highland valleys echoed with guerrilla skirmishes, disappearances, and acts of vengeance. The former glory of the Inca faded almost overnight. Communities split, torn between those who mourned ancestors and those who sought place within the new order. Ancient traditions, once binding, grew suspect in the eyes of colonial authorities or were weaponized in local disputes. Collaboration brought only fleeting rewards. The Spanish rarely honored promises, substituting new burdens for old. Over generations, cynicism took root, with people remembering the days when neighbors became informants, when trust was broken for profit or survival. The trauma of betrayal carved itself deeply into both the landscape and the psyche of the Andes. Still, the Inca spirit was not erased. Underground, across remote valleys and secret altars, stories of lost emperors and heroic resistance smoldered. Bandits and rebelsome, descendants of former nobles waged smaller, bitter wars against Spanish encroachment for decades to come. In some cases, communities formed hidden enclaves, preserving their language, customs, and memories, passing on cautionary tales about the perils of division and the seductions of betrayal. The story of the Inca's downfall endures not simply as a tale of conquest, but as a potent meditation on human nature. Societal bonds, painstakingly woven, can unravel in moments if rooted in fear rather than genuine trust. The temptation to defect, to seek advantage in chaos, may offer brief reprieve, but rarely leads to lasting security. Betrayal creates wounds that fester, breeding distrust that can outlast even the memory of empire itself. In every era, echoes of the Andean story flicker. Where power amasses, so too does the risk driven by ambition and anxiety that unity will be sacrificed for personal gain, that collaboration may be undone by a whisper or a bribe. One might wonder, had the Inca found ways to resolve their internal grievances and withstand the lure of self-interest? Could they have repelled the Spanish tide, or at least met it on firmer ground? Or, as the old chroniclers suggested, was this fate inevitable nothing but the latest chapter in a saga as old as humanity itself? The remains of the Inca world still captivate races climbing green mountainsides, stones joined so closely that centuries of rain cannot divide them. Yet perhaps their greatest lesson lies not in the physical grandeur, but in the invisible ties, the bonds of trust and loyalty, whose breaking tumbled walls mightier than any fortress. It is a lesson for all who wonder where the real strength of a society lies, not in gold or armies, but in the quiet faith that one can trust another, even as storms gather on the horizon.